All right, well, welcome to reInvent 2022. How about that? We made it. Pretty exciting. A lot to unpack today. So I'm going to talk about the state of the cloud in 2022, the shift from consumers to creators. And this just isn't about talent, if you think about it. You're probably going to be hearing a little bit from Adam in his keynote about the shift from consumers to creators when it comes to the consumption of cloud computing. We're getting a little bit beyond using cloud as just pure infrastructure, right? The real focus should be on creating and building solutions. That's really the value of cloud computing, working backwards from our customers and business solutions and building on AWS, not just consuming it. And the same goes with talent. And there's a lot to unpack in this presentation, so I'm just going to kind of get to it. So a lot of fun stats to share with you. But I think a better title for this would have been the state of disillusionment. There is a pretty big gap, and it's not a skills gap, in my opinion. It's a leadership gap between expectations and reality and intent and execution. And if we're going to go ahead and achieve the ROI on cloud computing, we have a long way to go when it comes to talent based on some of my experience, but there is a way through it. So we'll get to that. So a little bit about my experience. I spent a lot of time at Capital One in technology leadership. The last several of those years in cloud computing, I helped build the Cloud Center of Excellence. I was director of engineering and operations for Capital One as we were embarked on our cloud journey with AWS being our predominant supplier. I helped to move the first applications from on-prem into the cloud and realized that's a lot of heavy lifting that takes place to make sure you're doing it with the right controls and compliance and cloud native. So learned a lot from that. I also learned that it was a lot of people weren't really picking up what I was throwing down from the Cloud Center of Excellence. Nobody really understood that echo chamber of the Cloud Center of Excellence and realized we really need to shift from a Cloud Center of Excellence to a Cloud Center of Enablement. I earned a patent for measuring our cloud transformation. I got sick and tired of the executives asking me every day, are we there yet? And no offense to any consultants in the room, but the red, yellow, green status boards of, well, we're almost there and we're cautiously optimistic, just weren't cutting it. So I actually gathered cloud trails with API and Splunk and did some data visualization, was able to just show how poorly we were doing in the cloud and realized it had nothing to do with technology, right? It was about people. So I shifted to become Dean of Cloud Computing at Capital One, which came with a blazer with some elbow patches, and I set forth on a talent transformation journey that we had a lot of success with. I then joined a startup called A Cloud Guru, which then was recently acquired by Pluralsight, where I am now Chief Cloud Strategist, working with leaders trying to connect skills to outcomes. And I felt the pain. I felt the pain firsthand. I don't know if anybody could relate to some of the things on here. In particular, I think the lift and shift hernia is what resonates with me on here. Very, very painful. I have a lot of scars from our cloud transformation. And I have a lot of passion around saving people the time and money that I wasted. So hopefully you'll get a little bit of that out of this talk today. I own third level support. So if you all want to get a good bellwether indicator of how your cloud transformation is going, own third level support. I had a column on my trouble tickets called WTF, and that's how people were spelling AWS at the time. And it wasn't their fault. Took a hard look in the mirror and realized it was my fault. If my son can't catch a ball, I don't just keep on throwing the ball harder at my son, right? You have to help to take the time to educate folks on, some of the basics if you want to be able to have success. So we go. How about that? So there's a lot of talk about, what's going to happen in the cloud, where are we going in the cloud. Cloud is here. It's been here. Some of the best advice I got ever from a professor was be where you are. And I think a lot of people are forgetting about that. Where are we now with cloud computing, right? And we're a little bit in a trough of despair in some ways, right? A lot of efforts going on with cloud right now, but not really the full ROI, and a lot of that has to do with skills, which is a big passion of mine. Not surprisingly, we're seeing that 71% of leaders are seeing value out of the cloud in terms of speed to market, which is great. 90% of leaders are expecting to expand their usage of cloud computing over the next 1 to 3 years. That's not surprising, right? Gartner estimates that by 2025, 85% of enterprises, all enterprises, will be cloud first from a strategy, right? So that's kind of where we are, a little bit about where we're going. And it's a journey, and there is a lot of money being spent on those journeys. Everybody in this room is on that journey. You all are heroes on that journey. Many of you are reluctant heroes, but you're heroes on that journey. You're on a quest, and you're being thrust into the limelight, and they are spending a lot of money funding that cloud journey. There's about $500 billion being spent worldwide on end-user cloud computing services. It's growing about a 20% clip year over year. So expect that to be $600 billion this time next year. And it's becoming an increasingly larger portion of enterprise budgets, going from, 17-ish% to almost half in short order. So we're kind of getting to that point, this inflection point, right? I think Andy and Adam have all been saying for a while that we're still in the early innings of cloud computing, and I think that that's true. For us in our echo chamber here at reInvent, it doesn't necessarily feel like that, but I think overall we're still relatively early on. But there are patterns emerging that we can take advantage of here. So yeah, a lot of money being spent on cloud computing for sure. This was an interesting stat, I thought, that a worker usually leverages about 36 different cloud-related services every single day. I mean, cloud is everywhere, right? Whether you realize it or not, cloud is just sort of ubiquitous. It's like drinking water these days, right? A lot of leading organizations that are, sort of digital forward are using cloud services as sort of, just a core part of their business planning. The majority of what you're seeing here, though, from these 36 are mostly SaaS, type of base. That's about $175 billion out of that 500 billion pie. But interestingly enough, the infrastructure as a service, and closely tied with platform as a service, is growing at the largest clip, about 30% spend year over year, right? So I wouldn't be surprised to see, that becoming much more of a focus area. And that's why a lot of you are here. I mean, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, those are the core components of AWS that you all are leveraging to help build solutions for your organizations, right? Here's the issue. We don't really have the literacy within our organizations to be able to deliver on that. We have, again, $500 billion being spent worldwide. Gartner also estimates that 50% of all IT cloud migration projects are being delayed right now up to 2 years, simply because of the lack of skills. Spend a lot of money, you generally want that money back in terms of return on investment. There's some barriers in the way. Who's going to do the work? Okay? So this is, again, you got $500 billion being spent, and half of all projects are being delayed. So a lot of folks are struggling in terms of that return on investment. So I thought that was a pretty interesting thing. I do think that we get into this echo chamber of folks that know cloud, and we just assume that everybody does. When I was in the Cloud Center of Excellence, we all thought we were, the cat's meow, right? We all were talking cloud all the time. Then I did a Gemba walk out into the organization and realized people were trying to fake cloud like they faked agile for many years, all right? And it just doesn't quite work the same way. So a stat on here. So what's interesting is in this echo chamber, right, 62% of leaders are looking to implement technology as soon as it becomes available. You're all going to reinvent, these are some great announcements, I can't wait to get back and deploy X, Y, and Z. 64% of learners in your organization are brand new to the cloud and are looking for basic training. That is not a skills gap, that's a leadership gap. That's a gap between expectations and reality. That's a gap between intent and execution, okay? It's some basic technology skills that we need to be able to deliver on the promise of cloud computing. So we did a State of Cloud report, and the biggest thing that, my takeaway when I was reading it, my jaw was on the floor a little bit as I was kind of reading through it, because I would hope that we'd be a little bit beyond this. Most organizations, they have a 5-year roadmap for their cloud program. They just don't have a 5-year plan for the talent that's going to deliver on that, right? It's just the theme was the state of disillusionment, a gap between expectations and reality and intent and execution. And that's where we are today. So we're going to be learning a lot at reInvent here about all these new services, but just be where you are and play within yourself, within the organization. Just sort of start there before you, as a leader, start to create an even larger gap within your organization, okay? So, all right, the cloud skills gap. I thought that this one was pretty interesting. Cloud is hard. Cloud's hard to learn. It's a mindset shift, ephemeral workloads, right? Infrastructure as code. We found that learning cloud, it takes about 3 to 6 months longer than most other technology. So it takes a little bit longer to pick up what people are throwing down with cloud, all right? So, but people are eager to learn. When it comes to learning cloud computing, and then we have some of the things that they're most interested in. Security is such a hot topic. I'll kind of come back to security, cost, and control seem to be some of the barriers that leaders talk about. My hypothesis is, that's just how problems manifest itself when people don't have skills, right? S3 is a great example. S3 is secure by default. Then why are we having, security breaches with S3, right? That requires somebody to go in there and misconfigure it. All right. So this was this has put the nail on hit the nail on the head of the nail. There you go, something like that. So 75% of leaders are by default building new cloud, new features and services and products on the cloud. My only question is, what's up with the other 25%? Okay, I was trying to find out who they were, find out their stock ticker, short them, make a little money on the side. I'm surprised it's not 100%, but yeah, 75% are looking to go into the cloud by default. Gartner estimates that by 2025, that 85% of all organizations, again, will be cloud first. Who's going to do the work? You got 8% of technologists that say that they have extensive skills with cloud-related tools. That sounds like a skills gap. I kind of lend a little, err a little bit more towards a leadership gap. Right, we're in an echo chamber, and hold on to that 8% number. Just kind of put it in the back of your mind for a second. Because to me, that just sort of screams out, we're in an echo chamber. Most likely that 8% is probably pretty closely tied to your cloud center of excellence, right? Sort of a bimodal organization between the have and the have-nots. And they're the ones that are, saying, hey, 62% of them are saying that we want to go ahead and implement things when they come out because they get it. Well, you need the infantry to be able to support that as well. So, the good thing is, people do want to learn. They're not just your folks and learners and your workforce are not just sitting there on their hands and hiding under a rock like a small animal and hoping this too shall pass. It's just very overwhelming. I was talking to somebody in the speaker lounge, a technologist who was with AWS. It was at a university in a PhD program, and was originally overwhelmed by the thought of having to learn cloud. Right? So imagine if a PhD student that now works for AWS was overwhelmed at the prospect of learning cloud. There's a lot of folks that are running for cover. I mean, they're a little bit scared, but they want to learn. They just don't know what that first step is. I will say that individual went and got certified with the Cloud Guru, and that's how they ended up with AWS. That was always great to hear. So technologists, want to learn. We found that 97% of individuals that did go out and use a Cloud Guru and Pluralsight to learn were able to help to increase their ability to work and their job function, right? Not surprisingly, I learned something, I learned it with cloud, I'm able to go ahead and help to apply that. That's not a very shocking stat, but people want to go ahead and they do want to learn. And the good news is that when you invest in them, right, that they are more likely to stay. 94% of employees are more likely to stay. Ready for the next gap? Only 56% of leaders have an actionable and comprehensive cloud skills plan for their workforce. We need people to learn cloud. We want to go to cloud. We want to implement the newest thing. We know people will stay if we go ahead and invest in them. Only 56% actually have a comprehensive plan to go ahead and upskill their workforce. That's not a skills gap. You get my theme here? That's a leadership gap. Yep, you got it. So, barriers to skills here. So it's interesting that it was 71% of learners want to prefer to learn on a daily or weekly basis. They want that sort of continuous learning. They just don't want to, go off into a little, class for 2 days and then, hey, see you in a month. They want sort of that continuous learning, right? They want the time to learn. 5 of the 6 barriers here are related to the lack of time as well as organizational support. So I was at an executive exchange recently, and an exec was posed a question at the table and said, well, we have a subscription, but I just don't see people using the training after they get off work and go home. And all the executives, they were like, huh? It's like, yeah, so it kind of answered your own question there. To me, a litmus test is learning and doing are one and the same. It's kind of the Shingo way or the Toyota way. Many folks use agile within this organization. Great. Does your team have spike stories built into their agile sprints when everybody's standing up and doing their daily stand-ups? And there's a spike story that people can look at, and they're learning as a team together, a particular lab, a particular concept, and that's part of their workday. That's a simple way to go ahead and introduce learning, and also people want social aspect to it, right? People are generally social beings. This is a very simple mechanism, but just to sort of start tying the two together, right? Learning and doing, it's one and the same. time and support tends to be the biggest barrier. You've got to make it a part of the organizational's DNA. Again, that shift from consumers of talent to, how do you create talent? So I'm going to kind of get into a little bit of now it's all doom and gloom. Drew, come on, we're at reInvent. We got replay to get hyped for us. Let's, maybe a little bit more positivity here. I'll work on that here, I say. So it has been done and it can be done. In order to create a sustainable transition to the new operating model, you must have critical mass of cloud fluency at scale. Cloud fluency at scale is required to have a sustainable transition to the new operating model. Cloud fluency at scale is required to have a sustainable transition to the new operating model. I'm going to say that probably a few more times at some point. It's so important. You have to hit an inflection point. You need critical mass. You have to get out of the echo chamber. You have to democratize cloud education. It's full stop. You have to be able to have it ubiquitous. The infantry, everybody needs to understand, move from WTF to AWS. That's how you go ahead and start creating a culture of cloud. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And our CEO and founder of Pluralsight, talks a little bit about this, that you have to build from within. I don't know if anybody's tried to hire, seasoned cloud architects these days. They're not necessarily very easy to come by. You have the talent to succeed, right? You can't just go consume talent, and this isn't a transactional thing. You have to be able to create that talent. And if you can create that talent, that actually becomes a pretty strategic business strategy and create a little bit of a moat in terms of your ability to not only retain, but attract talent. So this is really fundamental in terms of a strategy. You have the talent. You do have the talent. I spent many, many years in data centers. I cut my teeth on Unix, ITIL, all that fun stuff, patching, technology refreshes. We have beautiful data centers at Capital One. We had. I'm sure anybody that has a Capital One card has it because of our beautiful data centers, right? No, not so much. They're an anchor, right? You need to drop that anchor and set sail. But the folks that work in those data centers know where all the skeletons are hidden in your data center closet. And you've hired them for a reason. You got to unleash their greatness, right? That was where I found my passion. Early on in our journey at Capital One, there was a lot of talk about hiring and consultants. And I'm looking around, I'm like, we have some of the brightest folks here. You just have to get them that decoder ring, right? How do you start connecting the dots between what they know and what EC2 is or S3 is, right? How do you start connecting the dots? And once you do, you just sort of get out of their way, at that point, right? So you start building that pipeline. Right, cloud is a culture and there is a language. So when I was at Capital One and we were doing the initial migrations to the cloud, we had these war rooms set up. And I remember going into the war room and saying something along the lines of, hey, we need to spin up a VPC with an IGW, and we had EC2, and front end with ELB, attach some EBS, and let's use RDS, And I had a few folks in the room that were kind of looking at me, and I was like, out of the room. If you don't understand what I said, I don't need translators, right? I need people that can speak the language of cloud. All you're asking for is a private data center with some servers, storage, database, right? Pretty much. That's the language of the cloud, is a culture. If you go back to your 5th grade social studies, part of a culture is artifacts, and one of the most important artifacts is language, right? So learn the language of cloud, right? And they'll probably introduce a whole bunch of new words here at reInvent. And with AWS specifically, you really need to figure out that decoder ring. You have to learn that language, right? I would need to learn the basic sort of components of the language. And that is such a fundamental part of getting started. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that literacy, starting with the basic fundamentals of literacy. when you talk about cloud literacy, it's just like if I want to learn a language of German, right, I need to go ahead and learn those words, those basic words. I need to learn how to count in German. I need to know how to describe objects in German, right? So I need to go ahead and that's the very first part of that is learning that language, right? What you don't want is a bunch of translators. It's just friction, right? I mean, there's a lot of consultants that charge a lot of money for that friction, right? But you have the talent that you need to succeed. So, that's just somebody getting in the way, again, of intent and execution. It's probably a good sort of a depiction of why 50% of all IT cloud migration projects are currently delayed up to 2 years simply because of the lack of skills, right? You talk about agile and continuous development and flow. Well, nothing impedes flow more than a bunch of translators that are in the middle of your process. And by the way, that's not just tied to technologists. Your Scrum Master's looking at a Jira board, they probably should understand a little bit about what's on that Jira board, right? I mean, have the basic cloud practitioner certification, just be able to understand a little bit of that language. Okay, same thing with the business. How do I know to ask for things if I don't even know how to describe it? Okay? So what you really want to do is invest in some basic literacy and then have some folks get out of the way. This is what it should look like. All right, this is the basic part of just basic cloud literacy. For me, certifications became the cornerstone of literacy. Fun story, when I was at Capital One, I was earned a patent for measuring our cloud transformation. I walked around and looked for the outliers on our board, and some of the folks that were doing the best work actually had this certification. And I was like, what is this, certification? I got certifications, they're all bunk, whatever. And I was like, I'll just go take my systems architect certification. Failed it miserably. I had my master's, and I was like director of cloud engineering and operations. I was like, cat's meow, Cloud Center of Excellence. Failed it miserably. I was like, this is a pretty good litmus test. This provides a lot of good insights into some basic things like DevOps and security, infrastructure as code, ephemeral workloads, all that kind of stuff. You have to read the white papers. So it was a really, really good starting point for me. What I also learned about the certifications is that when you get certified, you become an expert on cloud computing. Kind of looking at all the cynicism that I'm seeing in the room, trying to read the room here, right? So what do I mean by that? That when you get certified, that you're an expert. Because an expert is somebody that knows how much they don't know. Right now, organizations are filled with hazards, which are people that think they know more than they know. And they're a hazard to your team and your customers, right? So establishing a common language and a common framework, and ideally in a common experience through some social learning, you now get that liberal arts of cloud computing. You understand enough about the arts, the sciences, the humanities of cloud computing to be able to know how much you don't know, okay? Because it changes all the time, right? I mean, as we're going to find out with 2,000 announcements going on this week, but you have the context to be able to consume the content. That is the value of that certification. And when somebody is certified, it also provides them a tattoo of the new tribe that's forming. There's a sense of validation. And my other lesson learned with that is, as part of diversity and inclusiveness, it goes a very long way to getting rid of the gatekeepers within your organization, because now you have a tattoo of that new tribe and you belong. It's a very easy way to be able to say, hey, look, I know what I'm talking about. The emperor's not wearing any clothes. I can go ahead and talk about some of the issues that we're having and some of the services that are available. So it helps to provide some validation and credibility in that space. So we'll come back to certifications, because at the individual level, there is a what's in it for me. There's a lot of value in certification. I'm just kind of curious, how many people in here have a AWS certification? All right, look at that. That's great. And see, and one of the reasons, pro tip, the reasons why they have the certification is because at reInvent, you get into the certification lounge and you get all the snacks and all that stuff as well. So that's a little bit benefit of your AWS certification. Okay, so you're learning, you have literacy, step one, literacy. Okay, you have the tattoo of the new tribe that's forming, you know the language. So I know how to count in German, and I know how to describe objects in German. Well, I want to operate in that language. I want to go to Munich and go order ein Bier bitte, right? That's what's important to me. I want to go ahead and operate in that language. I want cloud fluency. So that really becomes hands-on experiential learning, right? What better way to learn than to actually get your hands dirty with cloud computing? I think it was like 62% recognized that preferred modality of training. I invested a lot of money in training originally at Capital One as Dean of Cloud Computing. It looked good, it smelled good. Less than 5% of the folks that initially went through the instructor-led stuff that I had set up actually logged into the AWS console. It's not the intent is to go in there and, again, fake cloud computing like you're faking agile. You need people to break through the glass of the console and actually get their hands dirty and get to work. Very difficult to do, and sometimes a financial organization to provide a sandbox. It's like, hey, come in and play and break stuff and experiment. Sandboxes and hands-on environments are an opportunity to do that. A Cloud Guru has sandbox environments, playground environments. They have a free play. You can go in and click onto AWS and it launches it for you. It's ephemeral, so we'll kind of open it up and deprecate it. You go in there and break stuff to your heart's content. No cost, no sign-in, all that kind of stuff. They also have where it's guided. Then you can have guided, hands-on, experiential learning. And they also have this thing called challenge mode where you can turn off the video instruction and then you get scored on how well you go ahead through the instruction. So all those are really cool, fun ways to learn. Just introduced this thing called custom labs, which allows organizations to go ahead and create their own sort of sandbox harness, because you might want folks to be getting hands-on in a particular way or using and building things in a particular sequence. So they have this sort of custom hands-on learn. It is the way to go. I love me some hands-on training, break through the keyboard. Now, when you're doing that, have fun. It's fun. It is fun. You can have fun with cloud computing. This is not like I have to go take a privacy CBT this month, this quarter, because it's part of my, job requirements. This should be a way to engage individuals. When you're teaching kids, how to draw, you don't be like, this is a green crayon. Here is a circle. Draw a circle. Here's some crayons. Let's kind of draw a picture. And by the way, that they're learning, through the process and building the product, they're learning colors and shapes, right? Fun fact, I am an Amazon Alexa developer champion. Okay? Why, Drew, are you an Amazon Alexa developer champion? Because at Capital One, I used Alexa as my craft project. I taught people how to build Alexa skills in an hour. I got the silliest Alexa skills out there. Really, really silly skills, almost like the Spencer's gifts of Alexa skills. But I taught a lot of people how to use that. Why did I do that? Well, they didn't realize that they were learning cloud computing. They're building a Lambda function with Python, connecting to S3. At the end of the day, though, this is the thing to keep in mind. They had an idea, intent. They were getting that idea executed and into Amazon.com for all their friends and family to see, kind of like putting the picture on the refrigerator, right? And they were doing it within hours. Isn't that the purpose of cloud computing, right? How quickly can I get an idea into production and then get the feedback and iterate? Those are the type of examples. Building, with IoT and Alexa and all sorts of stuff that you can do. Amazon makes it so easy with all their different things that they do. We have all these fun projects. Make it fun. Fun, right? Don't make these 10x developer type of hackathons behind a sneeze glass that only the top 5% are doing. Build websites and then have people grade the websites or, score the websites, whatever. Have fun with it. It shouldn't be anything that's difficult. All right, now we're going to get into area that's I have a lot of passion about. Critical mass. So you have literacy at the individual level. You're talking about fluency. Throwing a bunch of links at individuals is just a bunch of BBs sort of rolling around on the table. You need to concentrate that, and you have to achieve critical mass. Many people have heard of Geoffrey Moore's sort of crossing the chasm of product adoption, where you have to get from the early sort of adopters to get to the early majorities, and there's this sort of gap that exists, this chasm. And if you don't get through that inflection point, you will never get out of this echo chamber. Okay? It's this Geoffrey Moore's crossing the chasm. Well, I spent a lot of time studying that and trying to get AWS to be adopted as the predominant sort of technology conversation within Capital One. And I failed miserably because it's not about technology, it's about people. So I pivoted my study to more of social engineering and how do you create social consensus. And I found this study from 2011 where scientists mathematically modeled and discovered a tipping point in social constructs to be able to achieve critical mass from a minority opinion. Super fascinating. I was like, wow, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, and trying to, not in a Facebook cringy way from a social engineering, but how do you create AWS to be the ubiquitous culture within our organization, right? Cloud is a culture, there is a language. How do you democratize that? And what it says is that if you're under 10%, that idea will just remain in an echo chamber. Remember that 8% number from before, right? A little bit of an echo chamber, below 8%. 8% have the extensive skills, right? Haven't crossed the chasm yet. But once you hit that 10%, you hit that inflection point. And that idea spreads like wildfire throughout the organization. The goal isn't 10%. The goal is to get to 100%, right? It's just that you have to really baby it and mother it and nurture it to get to that 10% before it becomes a sustainable transition to the new operating model. And it takes a lot of work, comprehensive, actionable, programmatic plan to get there. Okay? A little insight onto the patent I earned, because at the end of the day, most organizations aren't in the business of just skills development. They are trying to deliver outcomes. Most of those outcomes are tied to moving and migrating to the cloud to be able to increase speed to market and innovation, get the flywheel of innovation moving through cloud computing. The question I was being asked all the time is, are we there yet? So I ended up modeling that, collecting data, using tagging strategies and a whole bunch of ways to figure out three things. How much have we moved to the cloud? That was the size of the bubble. How well architected what we moved to the cloud is in terms of kind of well architected framework. Examples are like tagging, multiple availability zones, things like that. That's the x-axis. The y-axis, I'm sorry. And then the x-axis was like, hey, how cost efficient? Are we using right-sized instances? Are we using ephemeral workloads? Okay? Small bubbles, bottom left, not so good. Big bubbles, top right, good. We were spending a lot of money, had a lot of little bubbles in the bottom left, pivoted to Dean of Cloud Computing, realized it wasn't about technology, it was about people. Invested in certifications for folks, not just throwing links at people, but having social constructs. Accelerator program with A Cloud Guru, where you can group people together to go ahead and get the certification. Your incubated learning communities, the certification is a what's in it for me. But what you're really doing is trying to incubate learning communities for sustainable transition, okay? When I started off at the bottom left, we had just a few hundred people certified, ended up with thousands of people certified, and the KPIs were a very fast follower. Shocker. You train a bunch of people and provide them the skills and the hands-on experience to be able to use cloud computing, and they start using cloud computing, and you can start delivering on the promises of cloud. That's a pretty good result from it. I think most people here want to get out of their data centers. One of the results that Capital One has is that they shuttered all of their private data centers and they're 100% in the public cloud, which certainly makes it a lot easier for them to be able to deliver innovation and speed to market when you have the talent to be able to do that and you don't have the anchor of these wonderful, beautiful data centers in the way. All right? I love this quote because I think it kind of ties in a few things here. That's why I pulled it out here. One, it talks about true transformation, transforming the business model, from a bank to a technology company, okay? It also talks about building, not consuming, right? Building solutions. But more importantly, it ties together matching the intent and the ability to execute with people and talent, okay? So that's a great summary. Just replace the company's name up here with your own and the industry with yours and, use that as a North Star, in my opinion, as an example. So I was measuring cloud maturity, a lot of talk about achieving cloud maturity. I kind of bucket companies I'm working with in 3 levels of cloud maturity, folks that are tactical, strategic, and transformational, and helping to guide people through those various stages of cloud computing. When you think about maturity, I will say a lot of talk about cloud maturity in terms of how well architected you are, how much you've migrated. I wish I had spent more time migrating talent to the cloud versus migrating applications to the cloud. And that mental model, I think, is something to be to think about and anchor on. When you're migrating to the cloud, right, what's your as is, what's your to be, and what's your path to get there? Right? I think it's like the 6 or 7 R's, right? Refactor, replatform, et cetera, right? That's kind of a general migration pattern. Well, when you think about the great migration that needs to happen with cloud talent, it's very similar. What's your as is, what's your to be, and what's the path to get there? Now, the easy answer to that is, the to be is you need to have a associate level solutions architect certification or a cloud practitioner, depending upon your level. The as is you have it or not, and the path to get there is, you take the course and you use the hands-on experiential learning to get there. But that's the starting point. It's like getting your driver's license, and then you kind of get out on the road and start getting the experience. So you really want to be thinking about cloud maturity, not just in terms of technology, but what does your workforce look like? This is the chasm, right? It's almost like, I think a better way to describe it is from cloud, the difference between being cloud native and cloud naive, maybe. That's probably where we are at this point, but there is a chasm out there. And as an industry, I think we are in this trough of despair. My concern when I was in an organization that we were going through the trough of despair, yay, we got a few apps in the cloud. All right, now we need to move from 3 to 30 to 300 to 3,000. Oh crap, who's going to do the work, right? Well, the folks that got you there, the 8%, right, the technologists, they're going to be the first to leave, right? So in that trough of despair is generally when you have more attrition than attraction. And that's what freaked me out, right? How do I accelerate through that trough of despair, hit that inflection point, get infantry, get critical mass, so I can allow the pioneers to continue to move forward and innovate, but I can go ahead and commoditize what we've built and what we learned to be able to have a sustainable transition to the new operating model, right? So there is a little bit of a disconnect right now to be able to get through it, right? The reality is, like, cloud's a default, right? When we talk about cloud maturity, you got, again, what's up with the other 25%? Got the majority of folks that are defaulting, to the cloud, just various stages of tactical, strategic, and transformational when it comes to that. How purposeful are they being about it? How much on the transformational one, they're really looking at business solutions and outcomes. I do think Adam's going to talk a little bit about AWS shifting, again, from services to solutions. I think you're going to see a little bit more work from a verticals perspective as well. But that's going to be much more, towards that right-hand side versus folks that are using it probably tactically in terms of just infrastructure, as code. But there is pretty much cloud is the default, right? And the interesting thing about the steps that we found that customers were taking to become more mature, like only 37% of them are actually seeing public cloud skills and growing that internally as a key step in terms of achieving cloud maturity. There's a little bit of a gap, right? So when I look at working in an enterprise, right, there's kind of these three levels, right? The executive level is really the intent. Why are we doing this? And where do we want to go, right? Destination cloud, digital transformation, change banking for good, whatever it is, right? Then they're going to charter a cloud program office or a cloud center of excellence and go ahead and allocate funds and say, all right, you guys figure this out. You guys and girls figure this out. You got to go ahead and build a program around this. And that's when we kind of looked around the room and said, well, how the heck are we going to do this? How? Generally, cloud computing, AWS, all the different services, well-architected framework, cost controls, that's the how. And they ask all the time, are we there yet? So, that cloud program is not only how we're going to do that, but the measurements in terms of when are we there. That's why, did a measurement tool to be able to provide and inform the leadership team. Who is going to do the work? That's the key. You got the how and the where and the why and the when. Who is going to do the work? Only 37% of leaders are considering that as a key step in their cloud maturity. It's not a skills gap. It's a leadership gap, right? So, if you go ahead and you invest in cloud computing and spend as much time on your talent migration as you do on your application migration, I think you're going to be in good shape. Just do a quick recap here, just to kind of drive a fine point on some of the things that we learned today here. So we have $500 billion being spent on end-user cloud computing services worldwide. That's growing to $600 billion, 20% growth year over year, right? Growing to be a much larger portion of IT budgets. But we have 50% of all IT cloud migration projects being delayed up to 2 years because of the lack of skills. A lot of money being spent, not getting that return on investment. 75% of tech leaders are building new products and features in cloud moving forward. Only 8% of technologists have the extensive skills to deliver on that intent. 62% of leaders are implementing the latest and greatest as soon as it becomes available. 64% of learners are new to cloud and looking for basic training. Employees are 94% more likely to stay with companies who invest in their skills development. Only 37% of leaders are growing public cloud skills internally as part of their maturity process. 71% of learners prefer daily and weekly learning. 64% of that was hands-on. 5 of the 6 top barriers and challenges is lack of time and organizational support. 90% of leaders plan to expand their usage of cloud in the next 1 to 3 years, with 85% being cloud first by 2025. Only 56% of leaders have a comprehensive and actionable plan to build and upskill their cloud workforce. That's not a skills gap, it's a leadership gap. And what does that manifest itself in, that gap? You hear about the top challenges in cloud. When you don't have the skills, what's going to happen? Security becomes an issue, cost becomes an issue, and your operations become an issue, right? So that leadership gap that's creating the lack of skills is manifesting itself in a lot of the challenges that are becoming, much more prevalent. And hopefully, you're not in the newspaper with those issues as well, right? So what are you going to do about it? It's pretty straightforward in my mind. I think there's a pattern that is emerging. A lot of organizations are having success when they just take a step back and just stop throwing links at people. Stop telling people to work in the evenings to figure this out, right? If it's so important, then invest in it in a programmatic and actionable plan, starting with basic cloud literacy. If you're not certified, get certified. Walk the talk, right? Get your cloud practitioner certification. It's straightforward. You can then hang out in the AWS certification lounge at Next reInvent. Start with your basic literacy. Move to fluency. Get some hands-on experiential learning. Just build something. Just build a website on S3. Break through the console. Just build something. Anything. Doesn't matter. It's worth it. Just build something so you have a little bit of that experience. Build up that cloud fluency, and then do it at scale, right? That's an important thing to be thinking about. It's not just, the rich getting richer and this, the cloud center of excellence getting smarter. Move from a cloud center of excellence to a cloud center of enablement. Shift from consumers of talent to creators of talent, right? That is ultimately the goal if you want to go ahead and succeed and capture the ROI, is invest in your people. I promise you it'll be worth it, okay? Until then, just keep being awesome, and looking forward to, we got a few minutes for some questions here, if there's anything that's pressing. And if we run out of time here, happy to meet with folks outside or over at the A Cloud Guru and Pluralsight booth on the floor of the expo hall. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.